Take your pick. Justice, piety, friendship, love, courage. If you can't define moral concepts, then you would certainly not take the risk to act in some way that purports to advance these things or observe these concepts or these values. And that's a really stringent requirement that Socrates is imposing in the conversation. The flip side of that, and he's not as clear about that here as he is elsewhere, the flip side of that is what we call Socratic intellectualism. That is that if you do know what is piety, then you're always going to act piously. The notion here is that this definition, the notion is that this intellectual content provides real power. Okay? If you have it, it will determine your actions. If you don't have it, it will prevent your actions. And whenever you look at Socrates, whenever you really look at Socrates and follow one of these conversations, at least I always feel the temptation to say how naive, right? How naive he is. Right? We often act on hunches and guesses and presuppositions and superstitions and custom and habit and all kinds of things generate our actions. And if we were to pause and stop and say to ourselves, well, okay, I'm about to do something. Can I really articulate in a solid and irrefutable way why I'm going to do what I'm going to do? My goodness, I think I'd just be paralyzed. But there's a real standard of, sort of a real high standard he wants us to reach. It's this standard of certainty. But how are you going to reach certainty? The only mark we have here of certainty is really, we don't have a mark of certainty, but by following the conversation, we know that one of the characteristics of knowledge is consistency, according to Socrates. If your beliefs are not consistent with one another, then there's no chance they're true. Okay. Does that mean that every time one's beliefs are consistent, they are true? Not necessarily. So it's a disqualifier. Maybe not a qualifier, but a disqualifier. And it's an absolutely, in philosophy, we talk about necessary and sufficient conditions. Okay? Aristotle, Socrates is telling us here, it is absolutely necessary. It's a necessary condition of truth that your beliefs be consistent. He's not yet telling us that that's a sufficient condition, that if your beliefs are consistent, they're true. But even that, boy, even if we could achieve consistency, wouldn't that be a great achievement? If we had a set of beliefs, if we could pull all of our beliefs out, lay them on the table, and look at them and say, oh, they all cohere, right? They all hang together. There's no inconsistency here or yonder. I don't think that would happen. That's a tough standard to meet, because a lot of us think things one day, and a different thing another day, and situationally, we have these situational challenges. What else? I think I've said enough about the UFO, but I sure want to be sure that we've dealt with everything that you all, every question you all have.
The way the dialogue is set up makes me feel that Plato was created a straw man.
Yeah, probably. It's certainly the case that Euthyphro is a character used for a purpose. Okay,
Straw man.
Yeah. But I guess I want to say two things. One is, Euthyphro is clearly this artistic creation that allows us to see Socrates at work. But on the other hand, Euthyphro is not an unbelievable character. So, often a straw man is almost unbelievable. In an argument, often you'll create a straw man because it's such a farcical representation of a position or an argument that it's obvious nobody could really maintain it. However, I know people like Euthyphro who are really stubborn, who have a combination of stubbornness and certitude. is that the right words? Confidence, maybe. Stubbornness and confidence, and they clearly don't, it's not justified for them to have that. And so he's a perfect foil. I don't know if he's so perfect a foil that he's straw. That part I guess I don't know. I mean, but I know exactly where you're going. I know so many people who say exactly these things. I mean, will say, I know what I mean. I just can't say it, right? Or I mean, I know exactly what I'm thinking. You're just not willing to pay attention to me, or you're not willing to believe me. So it's not. He's not an unbelievable character, but he is comical. He is comical. He's fun. Okay, let me summarize these three characteristics. Several of these characteristics then. The method employs irony. The irony is designed to lower people's defenses. Sometimes people don't even need their defenses lowered. They're eager to talk. They're eager to hold forth. The irony prepares the way for the what is X question. Okay? So if you say, I'm going to do something because I think it's a hunky-dory thing to do, Socrates will say, well, what is hunky-dory? What is hunky-dory? Okay? And then he'll ask you for that form, that idea that he can look at that is in fact common to everything that's hunky-dory, and it makes hunky-dory things hunky-dory. All right, so he asks for that. He asks for that common and essential and defining characteristic. Then he begins to ask a lot of questions. Okay, what do you think about X? And what do you think about Y? What do you think about Z? And what do you think about Q? And what do you think about R? Oh my goodness, look at this. What you said about R is inconsistent with what you said about P. Holy cow. We're gonna have to start over again here. We're gonna have to take a different angle here if we're ever gonna figure out what hunky-dory is. All right. Because you can't do anything in the name of hunky-doriness unless you can define hunky-doriness. If you can't define it, you can't act in its pursuit. Okay. And there are many opportunities in these conversations for the interlocutor to say any number of things. Say what a person could say what Euthyphro says. I know exactly what hunky-dory is, and you're just a buffoon and an imbecile, and you don't understand what I'm trying to say. That's one option. Another option is to say, man, I'm confused. I thought I knew it before I talked to you, but now I realize I didn't know it all along. And so it's the method. But you know what's interesting is that as we've seen it displayed here, it's not clear that the Socratic method of education will ever get us to the answer, what is hunky-dory or what's time, right? It's not clear that the method will get us, that the Socratic method of education will get us to the answer. It's clear that it can raise a lot of questions, but it's not clear that it actually gets us to an answer. Which might go back to this question that Dennis was posing for us. Maybe the implication is that there's not an answer to some of these questions. And that's what we should be satisfied with. Yes, sir?
Socrates agreed that all truth, all truth is contextual. And if we mistake search for truth for desire for more.
See, I don't know. He seems to be, the way he frames the questions, it seems to be he's saying just the opposite. He seems to be saying that there is an absolute truth somewhere, and we have to work hard to find it. I mean, the conditions of the questions he asks, the criteria that he seems to either assume or impose on the conversation, indicate that there is an answer here, and even an absolute, unvarying answer.
Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't have
to for irony.
Yeah. That's certainly possible. I mean, what you're saying is certainly possible. And again, to review just a little bit of what I was saying the other day, there was within Athens at the time this huge community is too strong a word. There was an industry of speech teachers, sophists we call them historically, of speech teachers who they functioned as mouthpieces for anybody who would pay them a fee. Now, because most of them were not citizens, most of them were aliens, they themselves couldn't appear in court, they themselves couldn't run for public office, but they could teach people public speaking, rhetoric. They could teach people rhetoric for a fee. And because they were trying to make a living, they might, for a fee, teach you how to argue in favor of invading Boeotia. And the next day they might teach for a fee your political opponent how to argue against invading Boeotia. So they came to have this kind of reputation as being moral relativists. I mean, they were just looked at as fishy characters in Athenian society because they had no beliefs to which they would hold firm. They were just selling their skills for a fee. I mean, we've constructed the legal profession in exactly that way, right? And the English common law that we've inherited, we're very proud of the fact that our law courts are adversarial law courts, and that neither of the parties advocating is there to tell the truth. That's what they're there to do, right? I mean, this lawyer is there to give the very best argument he can for his client's position, and this lawyer is there to do the very opposite. We don't expect those two lawyers to be interested in justice. That's not how the system is built. We expect the judge and the jury to care about justice. And so these rhetoricians have this mode of no moral commitments, but willing to work for anybody for a fee, and that was odd in the culture. That was a new thing in the culture. So you have that industry of these people who came across as not really believing in anything. And then you said some other folks, and I think Plato was probably the best example of this. Plato himself, who looked at what was going on, looked at his friend Socrates, and drew the conclusions that there is absolute truth. It's hard to get it, but it's there. And only a few special people have the intellectual wherewithal to get to it. But if we can create a system that conduces to their perfection, we can both prepare those knowledgeable people and then take advantage of their knowledge and have them rule us, because they'll be smarter than we are. Yes.
Is there a problem here in the methodology of irony, the rhetorical device, being used to establish something more actually true with rhetoric doesn't necessarily do.
Yeah, and that's exactly why it rang hollow when Socrates and his friends would say, "Oh, Socrates he's not a sophist." It just didn't ring true. It didn't have a ring of truth to the point that he had to drink hemlock. That's exactly right, because his method is his method is almost it's so insulting. I mean, his approach seems so insulting that it doesn't seem as though he's on the up and up. It doesn't seem as though this is a legitimate enterprise in search for truth. It does seem as though he's employing unfair and just unfair tactics.
It's almost like a Stephen system.
Yeah, almost like that, isn't it? Yeah, I like that. Yeah, he's a puzzling character for sure. Yes, sir.
In educational career, the Socratic method bandied around a whole lot, and I just realized almost never practiced.
Right.
Partly because people lack the intellectual wherewithal, I think, to do that.
Well, what we often mean by Socratic, nowadays what we mean by that, I guess that professor, the paper chase?
Yeah.
For us, the classic example of the Socratic method is that somebody's asking very challenging demanded questions, but he has in mind exactly what the answer is, and the interlocutor is supposed to say back to him exactly what he's expecting to hear. And what Socrates claims is that he doesn't know what the answer is. I don't know anything. I'm just so glad to meet you, Euthyphro, because you're smart and I'm not. And hot dog, I can find out from you stuff. And so Socrates claims that that the method itself doesn't have predetermined answers. But then there again, there were those who said that too was not a legitimate or honest portrayal of what he was up to. That he did have expectations, but he just wouldn't be honest about them. So for next time, what I'd like you to do is to read the Apology, because these are, as I said, these are a set. So in the Euthyphro, Socrates is walking to court, and he bumps into Euthyphro, who's walking into the courtroom next door. The Apology is, in fact, Socrates in court. Okay, and so he's on trial in the Apology. And it means it's the old-fashioned term of apology. It's not apology as in I'm sorry. It's apologia. It's the defense of Socrates. This dialogue is likely to be about as accurate as any ancient piece of writing. I mean, ancient pieces of writing they didn't have the same standards of accuracy that we did. The historians Herodotus and Thucydides, when they were writing speeches, recording speeches in their histories, they would say, these are the words that would have been best for these people to have said in this circumstance. These are so that's kind of the ancient standard. What you're trying to do is, as best you can, reconstruct the conversation that should have happened, even if it didn't happen. But the Apology is likely to be almost accurate because so many people in Athens would have been at that trial. There would have been at least 501 jurors. There would have been a lot of witnesses because this was a hot trial. A lot of people wanted to be there at the trial. So when Plato sat down to write the Apology, he couldn't have taken too much liberty. What we get in the Apology, what's nice about reading it, after you've looked at the Euthyphro, you've seen sort of Socrates in action. Now you get to see Socrates actually standing in front of this huge jury and actually trying to explain himself, give account for himself, trying to explain what he did, why he did it, and why he's basically not going to knuckle under, no matter what anybody does. And it's a wonderful sort of frank portrayal of himself. And you'll see, he'll have all kinds of questions about whether he's really on the up and up. And you'll be suspicious of it, as were his fellow citizens. He's not. There's nothing warm and fuzzy about Socrates, ever. Yes?
I just wondered, I trying to envision a scene. Has anybody figured out how all these 500 jurors were being able to hear what were going on?
Well, the Greeks were pretty good at architecture, and they constructed both their theaters and political venues in an acoustically effective way. I myself have to confess that I've never been to Greece, but I'm told that when you go to one of the old theaters that would seat several thousand people, that when you go to one of the old theaters, whether it's in Greece itself or in southern Italy, you actually can hear what people are saying on the stage. That there's something about the way they used hillsides pretty effectively, and they used the scaling of the what would we call them, bleachers, pretty effectively. So yeah. Yeah, so I don't know why they were good at that, but they were good. The Romans were good at arches, and the Greeks were good at theaters, and that's I mean, it's sort of there's an interesting cultural difference there. The Greeks like to talk a lot, and the Romans like to conquer.
I go past the amphitheater in Paris, and the guy took a piece I was way up in the top tier. Right?
Yeah, see that's just amazing. That's that kind of thing that we see. I mean, that ancient architecture is amazing. There's the sort of celestial structures that you see in Native American architecture. How do they do that stuff without things like motors and machinery and the wheel? Well, look, thanks. Y'all have been very patient. I guess next week there'll be about far fewer of you. And y'all are very patient. I appreciate it.